Some of the research shows that, 90% of the thoughts that we think on a daily basis are the same thoughts as the day before. So if you think that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, and 90% of your thoughts are the same known thoughts that you're always thinking, then your life should stay the same. Because the same thoughts lead to the same choices. The same choices lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors create the same experiences. The same experiences produce the same emotions. Those same emotions tend to influence the way we think. And our biology, our neurocircuitry, our neurochemistry, our hormones, and even our gene expression is equal to how we think, how we act, and how we feel. And how you think, how you act, and how you feel is called your personality. And your personality creates your personal reality. That's it. So then it makes sense then, if you want to create a new personal reality, a new life, you're going to have to change your personality. And you got to start thinking about what you've been thinking about and change it. You got to become aware of your unconscious habits and behaviors, even how you speak. Then you have to look at the emotions that you live by every single day and decide, do these emotions belong in my future? So many people try to create a new life as the same person.
Right.
In order to create a new personal reality, you got to change your personality. So the principle in neuroscience says that nerve cells that fire together wire together. Thinking the same way, making the same choices, demonstrating the same actions, creating the same experiences that stamp the same networks of neurons into the same patterns, all for the familiar feeling called you. And you do that for 10 years in a row. Well, you're going to hardwire your brain into a very finite signature because you're firing and wiring that way. And that box in the brain, that becomes our personality, becomes our identity. And by the time we're 35 years old, for the most part, we've done something so many times that the body now knows how to do it as well as the mind, and that's a habit. So we have these unconscious programs of behaviors, automatic habits, redundant emotional reactions, hardwired beliefs, perceptions, attitudes that function just like a computer program. You press go and it runs automatically. So then when it comes time to change, thinking positively is going to do nothing because your body has been conditioned for the most part into a program in the past. So the thought never makes it to the body because the body's on a different program. So how do we begin to influence the body so that the thought actually produces some type of change? So think about it. If you think an unhappy thought, you're going to feel unhappy. If you think you're a failure, you're going to feel like a failure. Once you feel like a failure, you're going to think you're a failure. And people get caught in these loops of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking. And that redundancy is a conditioning process because all you need is an image or a picture or a thought and a feeling, a response, a stimulus response. And so the people tend to condition their brain and body into the past. And so when it comes time to change, you got to leave that familiar territory. And any choice that you make, if you said, hey, I'm going to eat a better diet, I'm going to wake up early and work out, I'm going to do meditation, the moment you decide to do something differently, get ready because it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. There's going to be some uncertainty. You're not going to be able to predict the next moment. That means you've left your known biology and you're stepping into the unknown. Now, theoretically, that sounds great, but if the body has been conditioned into a familiar feeling that's in the known, the moment you take it outside the familiarity, it wants to go back to where it's comfortable. So the body starts influencing the mind, and this is where people say, why don't you start your diet tomorrow? Oh, why don't you start working out this evening? You're really never going to change. You're too tired. You have a headache. This doesn't feel right. And this is where people talk themselves out of it, because if they respond to that thought leads to the same choice, which leads to the same behavior, creates the same experience, produces the same feeling, and then they say, this feels right. No, that feels familiar. So going from one state of mind and body to another state of mind and body, you got to cross a river. And the hardest part about change is not making the same choice as you did the day before. Now, once people understand that they're going to be uncomfortable, then the question is, what thoughts do you want to fire and wire in your brain? What behaviors will you demonstrate in one day? And the act of closing your eyes and rehearsing who you're going to be when you open your eyes begins to install neurological hardware in your brain to look like you've already done it. Now the brain, which is typically a record of the past, now becomes a map to the future. And if you keep doing it, the hardware begins to become a software program and you start behaving differently. And then if you can teach your body emotionally what the future will feel like, that means then you're not going to wait for your wealth to feel abundant or your success to feel empowered or your new relationship to feel love. In fact, the moment you start feeling abundant, you're generating wealth. The moment you start embracing empowerment, you're stepping towards your success. The moment you're in love with yourself and you're in love with life, you start creating equals in your life. Now that's causing an effect in your life. So many people, they already know how to do this, but they usually wait for the worst thing to happen in their life before they get the wake-up call. Many times, when we're looking at a person's brain in real time, when they're going through some type of change or transformation, you see this massive amount of disorderliness going on in the brain. Like the person is really losing their mind. All the circuitry is coming unglued. There's all this cognitive dissonance taking place. That's the moment they want to quit. That's the moment they want to give up. That's the moment they don't believe in anything and they believe in themselves. That is the prime moment where change takes place right there, because that's the end. They're on the edge there. So it's important for people to understand that if you're going about living every single day in the familiar life that you're living in, and you don't have a vision of the future, then you'll continue to live in routine. And if you wake up every morning and you do the same thing as you did the day before, over time your body's going to be on autopilot, and it's going to drag you into a predictable future based on what you did in the past. And many people lose their free will to a bunch of programs. So then when you sit down and you become conscious of your unconscious thoughts, when you're in the program, you're unconscious, right? So the moment you become conscious of that thought, you're no longer the thought. You're observing the thought, and you begin to objectify your subjective self. You start pulling out of the unconscious program, and consciousness, awareness is the first step to do that. And so many people don't want to light a match in a dark place, because all of a sudden, when they decide to be defined by a vision of the future, they're stepping out of the known. You're going to hear, I can't, it's too hard, it's not going to work, what about this? And those are the thoughts that are standing in the way between that person and that vision, and it has to come up. And if a person has been in the habit of unconsciously complaining and making excuses and feeling sorry for themselves and judging other people, that's their habit. The moment they become conscious of it, now they're out of the bleachers and they're on the field, right? Because now you have to not let that thought slip by your awareness unnoticed. And then if you're living in guilt or suffering or pain or unhappiness, but you live that way every day and it just feels like you, and all of a sudden you become aware, oh my God, I've been guilty for the last 10 years. I didn't even know it. It just felt like me. You're starting to separate yourself from your biology. And so you have to go through the process of unlearning before you relearn. And that 95% of who we are, that is what's stopping us from stepping into a new future. So then if people then are waking up every single day, now think about this, the brain is a record of the past. If you wake up every morning and you start thinking about your problems, and your problems are just memories that are etched in your brain that are connected to certain people and problems and certain objects and things in certain times and places, the moment you start remembering your problems, you're thinking in the past, right? And if every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it, and you start feeling bad or unhappy, now your body's in the past. So thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of your body, and how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So most people then, they start their day in the familiar past. Then they get up and they run through a routine series of behaviors, and their body's now habituated on autopilot into a predictable future. That's the known. So the familiar past, the predictable future are both the known. There's only one place where the unknown exists, and that's the present moment. So then when you're creative, you got to be present. You got to pay attention to be creative, and that defies or goes against the programming. And so then there has to be some type of waging of intention that's greater than those programs. And most people, they get uncomfortable. They'd rather just get on their cell phone or, turn on the TV and watch a football game or distract themselves from that feeling. But when people really make up their mind to change, they have to come up against those feelings, those habits, those hardwired attitudes, and it takes a great act of will. But when we do it, the side effect is we see changes not only in our health, but in our lives as well. And then we say, wow, that really worked. And now we're the example of truth. That's what makes it so cool. new job, a new career, a new relationship. Some people are craving a mystical experience. Some people just want to understand life from a different perspective. And I think science has become the contemporary language of mysticism. I think it's science that demystifies the mystical. And if you can combine a little quantum physics with a little neuroscience, with neuroendocrinology, with psychoneuroimmunology, the mind-body connection, epigenetics, all of those sciences point the finger at possibility. And if you talk about religion, if you talk about culture, if you talk about tradition, even spirituality, I notice that you divide an audience. But science, in a sense, creates community. So people come for all kinds of reasons. And what I've learned in the last year or so is that what people really want is wholeness. Because when we want something, we're in separation or in lack, right? And so when we started experimenting with doing different scientific measurements, one of the things we started to notice is that when a person somehow connects to something greater, and that has a influence on their nervous system, the side effect is that they feel so whole, so rejuvenated in that moment, so blessed by life in that moment from an inner experience, that it's impossible for them to want. I mean, how can you want when you feel whole, right? And so when we started looking at heart coherence and we saw this tremendous changes in people's ability to be able to sustain a state of mind, a feeling in their heart for an extended period of time, we have data to show you could be sick and do that. You could be a vegetarian and do that. You could be a carnivore and do that. You could be rich, you could be poor. And it doesn't, if you're skinny, overweight, doesn't matter. Once you learn that skill of self-regulation and being able to experience a greater level of wholeness, that if you can create from wholeness instead of separation or lack, you can produce greater effects on the nature of reality. So we came from singularity, and when you're oneness or when you're source, there's no separation between cause and effect. Your thoughts create experiences when you're in oneness. We journeyed down the density, and now we're really separate from source. And so what happens between cause and effect is called time. So we're here now to prove to ourselves that the divine lives in us. So why not practice shortening time or the interval between cause, the thought, and the effect, the experience? And when you start seeing something appear in your life as a result of you at cause, you start getting more kind, more caring, more loving, more conscious, more present, because you feel more whole. And so people in our work come for a lot of reasons, and yes, they have challenges and health conditions. But instead of wanting to heal, I want them to learn the formula on how to heal. I want them to learn the formula on how to create reality. I want them to learn the formula that there is a door to other dimensions that they can create independent of any exogenous substance, and release latent systems in the brain that causes them to realize they're not a linear being living a linear life. They're a dimensional being living a dimensional life, and it only takes one of those experiences where you have an alteration in your identity that you can't go back to being the same person again. Now, the game changes now, because I've seen this so many times when that person runs into the divine, and there's an arousal that takes place in their nervous system. And I'm not talking about a little energy. I'm talking about energy that's so outside of normal. But the arousal isn't coming from fear, which normally creates arousal. It's not coming from aggression, which normally creates arousal. It's not coming from pain. They are running into information. They're running into something profound, and the arousal is creating ecstasy. The arousal is creating bliss. The arousal is so profound. The feeling that they're having isn't coming from anything out there. Mm-hmm. It's coming somehow from within them. And they get a taste of that, and they're less seduced by the outer world. They know where to get it. And now they have a romance with the divine. They have a date with the divine every day, because the process of creation in connecting to that field should be ecstatic. The process of healing another person should be bliss, because you need to connect to that field and create from the field instead of from matter. So there's so much cool research that changes our mind about that, because it's not matter that's emitting a field. It's the field that's creating matter. You teach people to change the field. You change the field, you change matter. And understanding that is a reversal in navigating in a realm beyond space and time. That once you can get beyond your attention on your body, get beyond your attention on different objects and people and things at certain times and places in your environment, no longer anticipating the next moment or living in the past, when a person can get transcendental beyond their identity, they start passing through an eye of the needle. And that is their connection to that unifying field, that invisible field of energy that actually is connecting everything physical and material. And you can't use your senses when you're there. In fact, when you are there, there's a whole nother set of rules to execute in. There's no place to go. How could you go if there's no space? If there's no space, there's no time. Every thought has a frequency, and being able to create from that place is why we're here. And so then, when you see a person feel whole, and we measure their oxytocin levels, it's not just a little oxytocin. The oxytocin is 200 times normal, and oxytocin signals nitric oxide. And nitric oxide signals a chemical called endothelial-derived relaxing factor, and that causes the arteries in your heart and your lungs to literally open up. And just like your sexual organs get engorged with energy and fluid and blood, when that center is aroused, with the same intensity, you have a fullness in your heart. It's physiological. And when oxytocin is released, it's impossible to hold a grudge. You cannot hold a grudge, because you wouldn't want to trade this feeling by judging another person. You wouldn't want to trade this feeling for any condition in your environment. And this is the beginning of unconditional love. This is the beginning of our divinity. So when you have all this energy in your heart and oxytocin levels are elevated, this is a different consciousness. Now, the only thing you want to do is give. You want to say, I feel so amazing, and I want you to feel the way I feel. So here, I'll give this to you. So now people come to our work to help others. People come to this work because they're not so interested in the material things, although if it got them here and they learn the formula and they learn how to create, once you get that, now that game's over. Now you want to make a difference. You want to leave a legacy. You want to contribute. You want to help somebody. And we bring children in at the end of the event and we heal them of really serious health conditions. And we have really profound and prestigious universities in the United States saying, what in the heck are you guys doing? Like, we want to come and study this because it's so phenomenological. Now you're being a part of something great. So yeah, it may be the sports car, it may be the new relationship, it may be healing your body, but then when that happens, now what? What are you going to do now?
Exactly.
I mean, what are you going to do when you have everything? What are you going to do now? The next thing is, how am I going to make a difference? We're wired to care for one another, to be kind to one another, to heal one another, to shine for one another, so to show other people they can shine. That's what the living organism does when they're not in fear, when they're not in aggression and hatred and prejudice and all those things that create division. So when that person runs into that experience of the divine and their brain goes into an aroused state of gamma, they're getting a biological upgrade. I can guarantee you that some health condition will be eliminated because they just ran into wholeness and their body will become more whole. So they could do all the diets, all the chemotherapy, all the nutrition, everything, and they're handling that health condition matter to matter. And when you change that, anything in your life matter to matter, there's a long space between cause and effect, between thought and experience. It's sometimes so long you forget what your dream was. Mm-hmm. But when you run into it, and you produce an immediate effect, now you're doing it in no time. It's happening in the moment. And if you can capture that, and you see the brain go into these elevated states of coherent gamma patterns, 200, 300, 400, 500 standard deviations outside of normal. That person can't make their brain do that. That's a subjective experience that we're capturing objectively. And we say to that person, what was that? And it's ineffable. They don't have the words to describe what a mango tastes like. They don't have the words to describe what the divine is. You got to just experience it. So then that person that stands on the stage that has Parkinson's disease or had Parkinson's disease, that's a 76-year-old female that couldn't blow her nose, couldn't swallow, couldn't chew her food, couldn't stand up. One moment running into the divine, and next thing you know, she's on the stage telling her story. And she's not young and she's not buffed and she doesn't look like a vegan and she's not dressed like everybody that cares about that. She's just, you would walk right past her. But when she's talking and I'm looking out in the audience, I'm looking at 1,500 people leaning in. Nobody has got their eyes off of her because she's the example of truth. And that's the 4-minute mile. Puncture right through there. That's a piercing through a layer of consciousness. And that leaves a footprint in consciousness. And there's someone in the audience with Parkinson's disease looking at her going, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And here comes the 4-minute mile. As soon as it's broken, the next person does it. So by the end of the event, there's so much love in the room. There's so much energy in the room because people feel so incredible that they're not attached to their past any longer. They're so connected to they're so connected to their future that they stop telling the story of their past. They're telling the story of their future. They're no longer believing in their past. They're believing in their future. They're no longer romancing their past. They're in a romance with their future. And if oxytocin levels are up and it's the chemical that bonds, you're going to believe in that future you're creating with all of your heart, it better be opened and activated. And we're going to measure it. And I'm going to tell you, you're doing it or you're not. And so then when people start realizing it was never about that, it was about who they became, that we overcome that week. We overcome. I give people numerous opportunities to get beyond themselves, numerous opportunities to connect with themselves. I want them to get frustrated. I want them to get impatient. I want them to get overly analytical because that's the end of their belief. And then finally, when they finally make up their mind to let go and just do it, and they run into that feeling, they run into that experience, they're all in. You think they don't want a sports car anymore. They want that, whatever that was. And if it comes with a transcendental moment, when they come back to their senses from that inner experience, their spectrum of reality is broadened. They're seeing things they had never seen before because their brain wasn't wired to see it, but it didn't come from the environment, it came from their inner environment. That transcendental moment now is producing a feeling, a frequency that is so unusual. It's so much joy, so much bliss, so much ecstasy. I've watched people have to stop it because it's way bigger than them. Now, I would consider that a good problem to have. You measure that person's immune system. You measure the changes in their heart rate variability, not a little amplitude, huge amplitudes. That person is feeling a lot of love. And imagine it's a man. Imagine a man whose heart is open that wide. They sob with the freedom to be able to not care what they look like. We're trying to fit into some paradigm or mold. So then a new consciousness in that footprint is emerging, and we have scientific evidence. I can tell you can make your brain work better in a week. You can make your heart more coherent. You can change the field around your body. You can strengthen your immune system. You can change your gene expression. You can lengthen your life. You can create so many oxidative changes in your cells. We have great research to prove that. That's the truth of who you are. That's the truth, that miracle within you. That evidence is the backbone that gives people permission to try it out. It's the language. Then you see someone standing on the stage telling their story in testimony, whether it's stage 4 cancer, whether it's MS, whether it's blind people seeing, deaf people hearing. You can't go back to being the same person after that. Evidence is the loudest voice. And so then when we begin to make those inroads and the footprint exists in consciousness and you're witnessing it in 3-dimensional reality, the illusion of limitation begins to change. And now all you want to do is you crave the unknown. So people in our work don't get up in the morning and go, oh God, I got to do my meditation today. No, they're not doing that. Their body is waking them up saying, get out of bed, because they don't want the magic to end. And when you start seeing the gap between cause and effect, thought and experience closing down, you're moving closer to the divine. And when that happens, all the things you thought you want, you no longer want, because the overcoming process leading to who you become, nobody can take that away from you. So we practice it in our seated meditations. We practice it standing and walking. You better walk as it, and you better be able to embody it and practice doing it with your eyes open. So when you return back to your life, when you walk from your house to your car, you're walking in the energy of your future. And if you keep doing that, it's going to become a habit. And people are going to start looking at you going, something's different about you. You know why? Because you're no longer showing up equal to their memory of you. Something's different about you. You're unpredictable. It's not what you're saying any longer. It's who you are. And so that person then is off their timeline. They're not headed to that same future. And all I want to do in a week-long event is bump everybody off that timeline into a new future. Some people, huge degrees. Stage 4 cancers, tumors disappearing. You listen to that story on the person on the stage. Your next meditation, you are not going to go half in. You're going to go all in. And that's all I want, is I want people to go all in. I want to provide people with my greatest understanding of the truth, and then numerous opportunities to experience it, nothing more. And when the magic starts to happen, it's beyond, way bigger
action that it does.
Well, first of all, I never planned on doing any of this. I'm just a guy, and I have a passion to learn, and I have a passion for the divine, and it's always been something that I've been aware of. It's a persistent feeling that never seems to go away, and I think people come to this work because they have that feeling. They may not be able to put into words what they feel, but it's an instinct in their mind that never goes away, that there's more to reality than this dream. And I think that feeling brings them to this work. So when I started on this journey and What the Bleep came around, and that became an overnight sensation, and I was doing all the Bleep conferences, people ask me the same question. And I pay attention to questions because that's what's the real dialogue. They would say, okay, your thoughts create your reality. Okay, how do you do it? I thought that was a great question, because this is a time in history right now. 15 years ago, it was philosophy. Quantum physics. Now everybody's informed. Now people. This is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. It's to know how to do it. And if you give them that sound scientific information, I now know that if I can speak it in a way that nothing is left to conjecture, nothing is left to superstition, nothing is left to dogma. They know exactly what they're doing and why. And the moment you know the what and the why, the how starts to get easier. So I will deliver concepts, ideas, mix different forms of science to create a model of understanding. And I now know that if that person, as I develop this model of understanding, can explain that model to someone else, they're wiring it in their brain. They're installing the hardware. If they can't explain it, it's not wired in their brain, and they're not going to believe that they can do it. So if they can turn the person next to them, between the two of them, and build a model of understanding, they're making their brain fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations. They're changing their mind. Mind is the brain in action. If I keep reminding them of what they're learning, nerve cells that fire together wire together. They're installing the circuitry. Now, the next step is to provide the environment and give them the proper instruction to get their behaviors to match their intentions, to get their actions equal to their thoughts, to get their mind and body working together. If they do, they're going to run into a new experience. Now, the crazy thing about the experience is learning is making new synaptic connections. That's what learning is. Research shows that you pay attention and learn something new and you repeat it just for an hour, you're going to double the number of connections in your brain. That's a lot, 1,600 to the 3,200 connections. That's a lot of extra connections. But if you don't review it, if you don't think about it, if you don't repeat it, those circuits prune apart within hours or days. So if learning is making new connections, then remembering is maintaining and sustaining those connections. You got to review it. It's so much easier to forget than remember when it comes to this stuff, and it's a constant process. So then if they can get their behaviors to match their intentions and they have a new experience enriches the philosophical circuits in the brain, but when those neurons string into place, the brain makes a chemical. And that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. And when you start feeling unlimited, when you start feeling worthy, when you are having an experience that causes you to be more in love with life, it is that chemical release from the limbic brain that teaches your body chemically to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. So if knowledge is for the mind, experience is for the body, and in that moment the person's embodying the truth of that philosophy, and now they're selecting and instructing new genes from the experience because the chemistry that's coming from the environment is information. And so genes make proteins, and all of a sudden they start wearing a different body. Repeat it over and over again. Do anything over and over again. Neurochemically, you'll condition your mind and body begin to work as one. Do it enough times, now your body will know better than your conscious mind. Now it's innate in you. Now it's second nature. Now it's simple. Now you know that you know. You may not know how you do it. You don't know how you know how, but you can do it because it's subconscious now. So now that implicit memory, now you're mastering that knowledge. You're mastering the philosophy. You're becoming the knowledge. You're embodying it so much so that it's automatic, it's effortless, it's easy. So when we started looking at people's ability to regulate their brainwaves, we just published a paper, it just got released yesterday. Our students in our community can do it in 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 9 seconds, 11 seconds. It's not like, hey, I'm getting to the divine ahead of you. It's just like they've done it so many times, like it's like driving a stick shift. It's not a difficult thing, but they practiced and they came up against their blocks. They came up against their limitations. They came up against their frustrations. They came up against their analytical mind, and I want them to in a week-long event, because if not now, when? Now is the new later, and let's do it now, right?
Yes.
So then what we learned when we started studying brains, well, we were doing pre and post measurements, and we've got thousands and thousands of brain scans. We have real-time brain scans too, and when I started seeing people whose brains were getting worse during a meditation, I said to them, what are you doing in there? And 100% of the time, they were analyzing their life or themselves within some disturbing emotion. And if emotions are the record of the past, and those emotions are derived from the hormones of stress, they were thinking in the past. And I learned right in that moment that if I got the person past the emotion, cross the river of change with me, forget about the emotion, just keep overcoming it. Forget about the past. Dragging people out of their past is the work.